Welcome back to Area DMG. I'm your host, Philip Wesley, the Mile High Mouth, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the NES Classic. Or rather, that the NES Classic is being discontinued. Now, part of me kind of wants to hold out hope that the reason it's being discontinued is to remove certain games from it that might have had lapses in licensing and add other games to it, and then, repackage it and sell it as a new NES Classic, which would be fantastic. I mean, they had this version, right? And this would be great. I'd buy a miniature one of these. But yeah, part of the reason I think why it's being discontinued is because, well, you have Capcom, Konami, Bandai Namco, and Taito's in there and such, and you have things like Tecmo Super Bowl and such. Yeah, you have some interesting games in that one, and I think some of those are highly volatile licenses. You even have Square in there. Now, there were a couple things I want to criticize about the NES Classic before we go on to, well, there's a rumor of a Super NES Mini, or a Super NES Classic. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Before we do that, I want to give a shout out to Hyperkin for developing this thing. This allows you to hook up an old NES controller to an NES Classic or to a Wii remote, which is fantastic. If they bring out one of those things for a supposed Super NES Classic, oh yes, I have a fighter stick for that, which would be amazing. But yeah, let's talk about the Super Nintendo. Now, in the United States, this is the only Super Nintendo design that exists outside of the Super NES Classic. Sorry, the Super NES 2. Now, they probably won't model it after the Super NES 2, which is the smaller version that gets rid of S-Video and a couple other things. I mean, let's be honest. The Super NES 2 is the better looking design and was more universal. However, they'll probably go with the classic SNES version, except it won't be in horrifying yellow plastic like the majority of Super Nintendos out there, especially from this generation. There's an oxidization that happens with the plastic, which causes a lot of them to just become yellow. Not this one, mind you. But yeah, here's your power, your reset. But yeah, let's get into the Super NES for a little bit. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with a Super Nintendo Classic. Mainly because the NES has a very iconic library of games, like Double Dragons on the NES Classic, Bubble Bobble, 2 Legend of Zelda games, 3 Super Mario World games, a Kirby game, some throwaways like Excite Bike or Ice Climbers and such. You have stuff like Castlevania 1 and 2. You have Final Fantasy on that one. What are they going to do for a Super NES Classic? Well, that might be a little tricky. Before we get into that, though, let me talk a little bit about what I don't like about the NES Classic. One, you can't use your original controllers on it, but Hyperkin made a thing to allow you to do that. But most of my problem with the NES Classic is this stuff right over here in the back. You see that little HDMI port right there? Right? Let's let that really up. See that HDMI and that DC in? Well, what they should do, HDMI is good, very good. I like what they did there, fantastic. But I want this HDMI to be able to control my TV. Like if I pop it in, I want it to be able to match power state on the TV. Also, let's talk a little bit about the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo Switch uses USB-C. Let's go ahead and take a look at that USB-C port there. See that USB-C? These use like micro or mini or whatnot, one of those things, but come on, just make it with USB-C so I can use the same cords that I use to charge the Switch or to charge the Switch controllers on the Super NES Mini. Also, I'd love it if they had some kind of well, they aren't going to do any kind of wireless, they're not going to do any kind of multi-tap for it, it would be nice to actually see it kind of communicate wirelessly with something. That would be kind of nice. But we probably won't see anything like that. In fact, we're not even sure what the games are going to be. Everybody's got like this list of 30 or whatnot, or oh yes, it has to have this and this and this. We need NBA Jam, we need Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4. You're not going to get any of those. You're not going to get Zombies Ate My Neighbors. You're not going to get Lagoon. You're not going to get a majority of the games that you'd want for a Super Nintendo Classic. In fact, some of the big classic ones are M-rated, but there are no M-rated games on the NES Classic. You need stuff that will be at least an E to a T in order for Nintendo to properly sell this. And let's go over some of the potentials. Now, right off the bat, I can't picture the Super NES Classic having 30 games on it, especially considering, unlike NES games, which are oversaturated on almost all devices, Super Nintendo ones, Nintendo's been a little bit more guarded about. In particular, they aren't as widespread as their NES Classic stuff, haven't been re-released or redone time and time again. I mean, they have, but not as prevalent. For right now, Super Mario Bros. 1 is on as many devices as, say, almost as many devices as Sonic the Hedgehog 1. But yeah, let's get right down to the nitty-gritty of it. If they will do a Super NES Mini or a Super NES Classic, of course you're going to have Super Mario World. Now, a lot of the games that we're going to mention, we don't actually have the physical cartridges for all of them, but I'm guessing we'll probably definitely have Super Mario World. We'll definitely have Pilot Wings, whether we want it or not. We'll definitely have F-Zero. And you can obviously count in Mario Kart. Now there's 4. Most assuredly, they'll give us a Legend of Zelda game in it. And we'll probably get Kirby's Dream Land 3. I'm not saying we'll get Kirby's Superstar. We probably won't. If we get Kirby's Dream Land 3, we'll get Kirby's Dream Land 3, but not Kirby's Superstar, or Kirby's Avalanche, which is Puyo Puyo, or which is actually licensed, I think, to Sega, or Kirby's Dream Course. That'd be really cheap if they put Kirby's Dream Course on there. But you can probably be rest assured that they will most likely put Super Tennis. This is Nintendo we're talking about here. So, other things, definitely we'll definitely get like Metroid, Super Metroid, right? Now, right now we're looking at about 6 games. We'll most likely get Earthbound. If we get Earthbound in there, I can actually forgive them if they only do like 25 to 20 games. Knowing Nintendo, there's a lot of different issues that they will need to resolve a little bit of when it comes to licensing. For example, looking at the NES Classic, we can probably, let's see, I'm grabbing other things here. We can definitely, and very probably, count in Super R-Type, at least. Definitely Super R-Type or Gradius 3. Probably Super Castlevania 4. Most definitely Contra 3. And I think one of the highlights for this would be Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I don't expect it to be, if it exists, I don't expect it to have Street Fighter or Super Street Fighter. I expect it to have Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Now let's see, what else would I want on a Super Nintendo Classic? Well, there's a lot of different games I'd like for it, and most of them come from Square. And, well, my best bet would be like Chrono Trigger. If this thing had 20 games and had Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Super Metroid, Super Mario Kart, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and I don't know, if it had like 20 games in it, that would be perfect. But there are a couple games that I know they probably will not be able to get. Mostly Star Fox. We'd all love it. But you see that little thing right there? It's a Super FX chip. Due to licensing, we probably won't get it, which is a shame. Other ones like Tactics Ogre or Illusion of Gaia, might be a might. I'm thinking I'm going to post a list at the end of this of games that I think might show up for this. I doubt we'll get a Fatal Fury. Sorry, not Fatal Fury. Final Fight. I mean, we might. If we do, I'd like it to be Final Fight 2, not 1. I mean, we'll definitely... I mean, things like Mega Man X could possibly be a lock. But the ones that are a little bit more difficult, ones that we probably won't see, would be like Super Mario All-Stars, things like Killer Instinct, which would be an M-rated game now, probably. And then there's these things like Final Fantasy 2, Mystic Quest 3. Now, we might get that. If we get this particular system and they retail it for about $100 or $120, I think it'd be worth it if we get some of those Final Fantasy games in there. Now, there are some games which... the thing that's up in the air is the Donkey Kong games. Now, they recently got these on Virtual Console, and you can get them on the 3DS and such. Now, if you can get Rare on board with these and get these on the system, then we'd have like Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, 3, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Super Mario World. We wouldn't get Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island because of the FX chip. Pilot Wings, Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, F-Zero, Super Metroid, Super Mario Kart, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Earthbound, Contra 3, Castlevania 4, Super R-Type, and probably something like Super Tennis or some of the others. Now, personally, in a dream scenario, I would pay about $100 for this and have about 20 games, because honestly, I feel like they lost money on the licensing with the last one, and that's part of the reason why it's been discontinued. I know people are like, well, how can you, these things look cheap to manufacture. How can you lose like all this money if you spent if you sold 1.5 million of these things? Well, licensing. One thing that people don't figure in is that a lot of licensing costs money. And there's all these types of fees with that. You have to pay everyone if you want something on it. Which is why we probably won't see Uniracers, because the people who run Pixar are terrible human beings. And they didn't like Uniracers. And they think they own unicycles. That was terrible, really, seriously. And we probably won't get Final Fantasy 3 because of censorship issues. There's some stuff that happens in this that they censored in later games on the GBA. Most of it involving Celis. But it would be amazing if they did that. I would pay up to $150 if this thing had Final Fantasy 2, 3, Mystic Quest, Earthbound, Super Mario RPG Legend of the 7 Stars, and then a bunch of the other games I mentioned. Because it'd be worth it. It definitely would be worth it. We probably won't get Super Mario All-Stars on there, which would be nice, but I don't see them doing it. And as much as I'd like it, well, I'm thinking my final list for this, if we get 30, I'm guessing we'll get Super Tecmo Bowl 2, Tecmo Super Bowl 2, Harvest Moon, most of the games I've mentioned here, things like Gradius 3, Gradius, Super R-Type, most likely a few things like Final Fight, possibly Breath of Fire. Breath of Fire is a good one, that we might get that. There's so many different games that I'd like to see in it. In fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to post up my listing of the games I think we'll see in it. My guesses, and then a list of games that I'd hope to see in it, and then a list of games that, in a perfect world, would be on this. And you know which ones I'm talking about. Star Fox, mainly. And, yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think. What games do you want them to put on a Super NES Mini or Super NES Classic? What would you pay for it? Now, a lot of people will be like, well, the NES Classic... No, the NES Classic, with all the licensing there, even though there's a lot of Nintendo games on there, you have Bandai Namco, you have Square Enix, and you have Capcom and Konami. And those four in particular can be a pain in the butt. when it comes to this stuff. Things like Tecmo Super Bowl, that's when a lot of people played Tecmo Bowl, but that didn't include actual player names. Super Tecmo Bowl, if I remember correctly, does. And that could be an issue, because then you have to worry about the Players Club. Those types of unions. That's why you probably won't see an NBA Jam on this. Because all of those players, many of them have contracts which dictate how their likenesses can be used. Similar to why Punch-Out, Super Punch-Out would definitely be a shoo-in on this. Why you don't see Mike Tyson in there. Not just that, and why you probably wouldn't see, say, King Griffey Jr.'s Winning Run or King Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball. Although I'd like those. Those were pretty good. Winning Run has some fantastic music, and it's actually a good game. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they do this. Eurogamer was the first company, or rather the first news agency to report on this rumor, because right now it's unconfirmed. But they were right about the Switch, and they were right about the NES Classic. So you can take that with a grain of salt, or multiple grains of salt if you like. But if a Super NES Classic happens, my guess is we probably won't see 30 games on it. We'll see 20. And it's going to be slightly more expensive than the NES Classic because Nintendo doesn't want to lose money on every unit sold this time. Because, hey, this was a device that they put out apparently for a limited time only, although it sounded like they originally wanted to make it for more. I'm guessing if we do see a re-release of the NES Classic, you're going to see Golf, Clue Land, and a couple other things replacing certain titles. Which, well, if that means that they can put it out again, you may have to say goodbye to Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 2. Or you may have to say goodbye to things like Bubble Bobble or Final Fantasy being on that device. Which would be a shame. Because, yeah, licensing is terrible, ladies and gentlemen. It's like, let's say you made $100, and then you give about $50 of that to the manufacturers, right? And you pay all your developers, you pay the manufacturers, and then you pay the licensing fees. You could sell a device for about $100 and then make maybe about $10 or less on it. And trust me, no one wants to spend all that time in development, all that time in licensing and negotiation, and then not pull a profit. If we see the NES Classic return, it will be more expensive. If we see a Super NES Classic, it will also be more expensive, and it may have less games. So, temper your expectations. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what types of games you hope they will have in a Super NES Classic. I've got my list, and I'm going to put it at the end of this video, of what I think it'll be if there's 20, realistically, and what it might be realistically if there's 30 in this system, in this upcoming Super NES Classic. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, hit that share button if you haven't already, and then hit that little bell so that you are notified whenever we have a brand new episode. And until the next episode comes out, you are now caught up.